Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. I want you to pause the video at the beginning so that you can grab a notepad and a pen, because I want you to commit to yourself that you'll jot down some note, an action item that you can implement in your business today, because that's what it's all about. We have to explore these concepts so that we can come up with new ways of implementing ideas to drive our business forward. With that in mind, I will give you the caveat that today's topic is you're fired. And this isn't a very pleasant topic. I've kind of been postponing this, putting this one off, because you kind of come across as cold-hearted when you're talking about firing someone. It's not a pleasant topic. It's not something that we want to address, but as entrepreneurs and business owners, we need to understand the notions surrounding firing and terminating people's employment. So I'm going to handle this maybe a little bit delicately, but as with so many things in these videos, I am inspired to do them based on conversations I have with other business owners, sometimes my own team, or what is transpiring in my business. And firing people is a necessary evil. It's a necessary part of business, and it does not need to be evil. So let's get started. Let's dive into this. And I want you to think to yourself, maybe you don't have anybody whose head's on the chopping block, so to speak, right now, and you don't think that this is very relevant, but I think you're going to take away some ideas that'll get you stimulated and thinking about whether you have the team that you deserve and that you are obligated to provide for your business. Let's look at it from the who, what, the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and then we'll also add a how. Let's start with what. First of all, what am I talking about when I say you're fired, when you're firing somebody on your team? So as a manager, as a business owner, entrepreneur, it will come up from time to time that you need to make an unpleasant decision to terminate someone's employment. Now, we have to differentiate between furloughing someone, laying someone off due to financial reasons. So for the what, we're going to define firing as terminating employment where you are making a decision based on a desire to replace that person with somebody else. So if you are just eliminating the position, well, I suppose you may actually fire someone and eliminate the position, but we're really focusing in on if you are replacing somebody for some reason. It's not about, well, we are actually just going to lay you off for financial reasons. So that's the first part of the what. And then when it comes to terminating someone's employment, you can further define that by looking at it through the lens of, do you have cause, or is it performance related? So there are, really, I think those are the two main categories. As much as there's a variety of reasons that you might terminate someone's employment, it really comes down to whether or not their performance is failing to meet your expectations, or do you have cause where they basically violated something fairly serious in business and they're not welcome on your team anymore. So that's the what. The who is really important, and think about it on your team. This may seem obvious. It's like, well, you're not looking for someone to fire, but I do recommend that you do these periodic inventories of your staff. And what I'm talking about here is evaluating your team and asking yourself, is this person necessary part of our team? Is this person a performer, a star employee, or do we need this person? Is this person necessary? I think that's an important thing, even though this sort of seems silly to talk about. Like, you're asking yourself, who? Well, Michael, what do you mean, who would I fire? I'll know if there's somebody that I should be talking about firing. I want you to think from time to time about evaluating your team, because what happens is, what I have observed with many managers is there are people that discussions should ensue regarding these particular people, whether or not they should be on the team or not, and people avoid it because it's unpleasant, because nobody wants to be the one to have to pull the trigger or make the decision to affect someone else's livelihood. Often it's avoided, and people just maybe stay employed in an environment where they're not performing well, or worse yet, they may be abusive or toxic to the team in some way. And because people avoid that discussion, or it's flying under the radar of somebody who should know and everyone else on the team knows, I can't believe this person still works here. Why does this person have their job? It's setting a bad example or whatever for the rest of the team. So do that evaluation of your team. And that's the who. Who, what, when. Okay, let's talk about when is it time to fire someone. And as so often is the case in these videos, I have got to put the onus on you, and I've got to put the responsibility or the accountability lay with you as to whether somebody is needing to be fired or not. And what I'm saying is, if you need to terminate someone's employment, often it is your fault. Ultimately, it's because of some failure in meeting your obligations. And I've got the video, the 4 obligations of management. We're going to kind of go through some of those things. So the first thing is, if you're letting someone go because they have a bad attitude or they're failing to perform or whatever, you have to ask yourself if you hired the right person in the first place. Is this person on your team due to a hasty hiring and recruitment decision you make, or did you take your time and really spend some time trying to make sure that you hired the right person? Remember, if a person's not doing what's expected of them, there's only a handful of reasons why that is. And if it's because they are incapable of doing what's expected of them, you've probably made a poor hiring decision. If they lack the requisite skills or aptitude, raw materials to be able to do the job, then, and you have to fire them, well, I would recommend that you do that. You need to replace that because you have an obligation to your business to hire the right people. But again, that's on you. So that's the first thing. You have to, when you're evaluating whether or not someone needs to go, whether you need to terminate someone's employment, I want you to go through these 4 obligations. So the first one is, did I hire right? Is this person a good fit for the team? Do they have the aptitude and requisite skills? And if so, then you need to move on to the next obligation, the next question for yourself. If not, then you can stop there and say, okay, well, I guess I should rectify my mistake. I have an obligation to my business and to the other stakeholders in the business, the other people in the business, to, make up for that bad decision I made at one point, that hiring decision. So let's say you've determined, no, I did hire a person who is capable of doing the job. They had the right materials. So you move on to the second obligation and you ask yourself, did I clarify sufficiently my expectations of this person? So if a person is failing to meet your expectations and you're considering employment termination, you're asking that question again of yourself. Before you ever look at firing someone, you need to look back inward, and you have to do the introspection of asking these questions. And it's incumbent upon you, it's your obligation to clarify your expectations of somebody. If somebody is capable of doing the job and you have failed to clarify for them what's expected and they're not meeting your expectations, well, for goodness sake, let's not resort to terminating someone's employment yet. Let's go back and clarify expectations, and you should document that. So that comes down to good role descriptions and open communication, ongoing communication, because things change in a business and market conditions change, your needs change, and that doesn't mean what you set out in terms of a job description for somebody on day one is always going to be the same. So you have to have an ongoing communication. So that's that second question. Have I clarified? Is there a lack of clarification here? If that's not the problem you're experiencing, if your reason for questioning someone's employment security revolves around the clarification of expectations, then make sure you take the requisite time to clarify what's expected of them before you ever consider firing them. And so if the answer is no, yes, I have met my obligation, I've fully clarified for them what's expected, and they are continuing to fail to meet my expectations, then you have to ask yourself, have you given them the requisite training, tools, and resources? Because it's incumbent upon you as the boss, as the employer, to make sure that people have what they need to do their job. So if they're capable and they understand what they need to do, but you fail to give them a tool they need, it could be a software tool or a physical, tool like a hammer, some piece of equipment, or you fail to train them. It's like, this person's intelligent enough to do the job, but they do require a little bit of training, and that wasn't something that you expected them to come to the job with, and you haven't been diligent in doing your training, or any other kind of resources. So if you're expecting somebody, the example I've used in the past is you've got somebody doing marketing for you as an example, and you fail to give them the financial resources they need to be able to advertise and to set up advertising and marketing campaigns for you, or whatever kind of resource. They might need some other labor resources dedicated to them, or the time. You're failing to give them the time to perform. So that's the next question. Have you given the person the requisite resources, training, and tools to be able to do their job? If not, then stop, and certainly don't terminate somebody's employment. It's back on you. You have to go back and discuss with them, what do they need? Now I do acknowledge that communication is a two-way street, and both the employer and the employee in that relationship have an obligation to communicate, and there's a discussion that should ensue. So you might say, well, the person, as far as I know, they have everything they need. They've never brought it up. But as the employer, you have a greater obligation to bring it up and give them an opportunity. So you might even say, hey, in a coaching session, some kind of performance review, it's just not working out so far, but I want to give you every opportunity. So is there something you're missing? And you should have shared with your team my video about the 4 obligations so that they know what you hold yourself accountable to. They understand there's 4 obligations. If you haven't done that, then at least discuss it with them at this moment and say, is there anything you're missing? Any training that you require? Any tools? And you might have to go outside to get some of that training. You might have to rely on some other people. It's not necessary that you do all the training yourself and that kind of thing. So you ask yourself, and once again, if you are answering no, yes, or yes, I have provided the necessary tools and training and resources, then the last one is accountability. Are you holding the person accountable? And do you have a culture of accountability? I've got a whole video where I elaborate on that and how you can really salvage people. You can make people, the whole purpose of holding people accountable is to make them successful, to get the most out of them. And yet, because sometimes it involves confrontation, we avoid it. Many managers have flawed thinking and they avoid it. They procrastinate, and it's just something, they don't look forward to having to give some constructive criticism back to the person. Or it may be simply that it's a little bit of laziness, and you're avoiding doing something that you know is going to take a lot of effort, because in that meeting where you're holding them accountable, they may say to you, I need some kind of resource. I need some extra training, and you're not sure how you're going to provide that to them, even though you know it's your obligation. So you avoid the whole discussion. That's flawed thinking, and it's not effective management. So instead, ask yourself, have I got a culture of accountability here? And so you can't fire somebody just out of the blue. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. And there are laws that differ from one place to another. Locally, the expectation of the employment laws in my local area are that you would have spent some time, if you're letting somebody go for a performance related reason, or something that isn't really egregious in terms of letting them go with cause, then you have documented this in writing, and you've sort of written them up. You've had multiple occasions where you've tried to correct a behavior that is, unacceptable to you, or is just failing to meet your expectations. You have to give the person sort of warnings and coaching. And that's fair. Regardless of the laws, you should be doing this anyway. So again, if it's not something super egregious, something very offensive that you're letting somebody go for, but it's something to do with their performance, failing to meet expectations despite the fact that they're capable and that they have all the clarification, training tools and resources, you still have to go, have I been holding this person accountable? We all need that measure of accountability. And in fact, even though we kind of avoid it, it's one of those things, it's kind of like exercise. It's like we feel good when we have it, and we excel and we get better with accountability like we might with exercise. But because there's a little bit of pain involved, because you might have to have thicker skin because you're getting critical feedback, people tend to avoid it. But truly they do want it, and it is incumbent upon you to provide it to them. So you've asked yourself that last question. Anytime that you can go through that and you can say, yes, I've met my obligations, I've hired a person who's capable, I have clarified my expectations, and we have a culture of communication where they can always come and ask if they required further clarification. So there's no excuse there, and they have access to the training, resources, and tools that they need to meet expectations and perform their job, and I've held them accountable, and it's still not working out, then absolutely, you are justified in pulling the trigger and terminating the employment. So that's the when. When is when you've met all your obligations and it's not working out. And the other part of when I would say to you is as soon as you recognize that. You don't want to delay this. Now, when you do question, you go, I haven't met all my obligations, then the when becomes after I've met all my obligations. You want to give your people every chance to succeed. You shouldn't, be the executioner. Instead, you're like, it's in your best interest. You're investing in these people. All the time you invest in trying to recruit somebody, add someone to your team, and then the training and all the various ways that you dedicate resources to adding someone to your team and maintaining them on your team and developing them on your team. It's in your best interests to make sure that person succeeds. So of course you want to do everything in your power to let them succeed, but don't deceive yourself. And I've seen this time and again with managers where the writing is on the wall. It's clear, and it's clear to a lot of, say, people who are further removed from the situation, who are more objective, and they say, this person really needs to go. So don't deceive yourself. The when, aside from after you've met all your obligations and it's still not working out, that's the first part of the when. The other part of the when is immediately after you recognize this needs to be done, you should do it immediately. And then also, on a sort of a micro level, when should be at the beginning of the shift. I've seen people say, well, I'll do it at the end of the day. Let them work their last day. And that's not, I don't think, a good policy. It's probably too much of a minor detail to debate at this point, but I would say you would do it first thing in the morning, first thing at the beginning of the shift or whatever. So those are the whens. The when is you've met your obligations and you're doing it immediately. You're not going to postpone this. Not at the end of the month, it's not at the end of the year, it's immediately, and it should be at the beginning of the shift. So I suppose the immediate could be if something occurred. Now remember, we've been talking about meeting your obligations, but sometimes you letting people go for cause, and like I said before, something that's more egregious. So certainly if somebody is abusive, now there are spectrum, the definition of abusive can fall on a spectrum. Like somebody could be sort of a little rough around the edges and lack respect when they communicate, or somebody can be just downright abusive where they don't have boundaries in their life and they fly off the handle and they're cursing at you or their peers or the customers or whatever. So, I'm talking about if somebody is blatantly abusive. If it's a little bit more minor, then you still should do those things where you clarify your expectations. Hey, this is completely unacceptable. That's where you're drawing the line in the sand and you're setting boundaries with the person. You're letting them know this is completely unacceptable. And so somebody with a bad temper or whatever, want to check that as soon as possible. But you'd hate to lose somebody with all this investment, and maybe they have a lot of potential that you can deal with, but you fail to tell them, hey, I don't know what worked at your last employer or what you get away with at home, but that's not going to fly in the workplace. And so in those cases, it doesn't have to be immediate, but there are certain things. Certainly any kind of violence or threatening behavior needs to be dealt with immediately. I actually was in a situation one time where a member of the team uttered a threat involving a firearm. I mean, the person didn't have a firearm, but intimated that they possessed a firearm and that they were going to shoot somebody or whatever. That's an obvious one. So hopefully you don't ever encounter something like that, but there are obvious situations where you need to pull the trigger. Now, this person happened to be the top performer in his department at the time that this happened. And I have seen where people make excuses based on performance, where somebody doesn't have boundaries and someone comes to their defense. It's like, this person is abusive or threatening or violent, and because the person is an excellent salesperson, a top performer or whatever, we're going to tolerate that? Definitely not. You can't do that. There are enough great people in the world to work with that you don't have to make exceptions and deal with somebody with that kind of baggage that would be in your work environment. You just shouldn't tolerate that at all. Another one would be theft. If somebody is stealing from you and you have evidence of that, then you don't need to worry about your obligations or any of that. So the case of threats, abuse, threats, violence, these types of things, then also some kind of sexual harassment. And again, I want to be careful because there is a spectrum there. There's a comment, and these days with political correctness and everything, you're never sure where on the spectrum something, if you didn't witness it, and it may be a situation where you have to draw boundaries and tell a person what's acceptable and what's not, but there are some things that are very blatant, and I won't give examples now, but you can imagine. So those are the types of things where egregious behavior, where you pull the trigger immediately, regardless of your obligations, and certainly regardless of how valuable that person is. A moment ago, I mentioned potential, and that's another thing I have dealt with many times with managers where, the writing's on the wall and they should be pulling the trigger and letting someone go, but the person has such great potential. What that is, that's a confirmation bias, and it's one of these things where we are having an escalating commitment. So what happens is the manager has invested a lot into the recruitment process, and they saw this person has great potential, and then they maybe defended their position. They promoted this person to their superiors, their supervisors. They promoted this person to everyone else as this great hire. They made this great decision, and the more time that goes on and the person is not performing, is failing to meet expectations, that time becomes an escalating commitment situation where the manager thinks, oh no, we've put so much into this person, and this person has such great potential. Don't be deceived by that. Don't deceive yourself, and don't let someone else on your team deceive you into waiting for that potential to come out. It should be obvious right away. Now, the potential may not result in grandiose performance right off the bat, but it should be obvious in other ways. Like, wow, this person's got a great attitude, a great work ethic, they're a very quick learner, and I can see a bright future for them. If you're seeing none of that and all you hear is that on paper and according to their resume and interviews, they talked a good game and they should have great potential, don't deceive yourself and don't let anyone else on your team deceive you into postponing what should happen immediately. If the person is not performing and all your obligations have been met, then pull the trigger. Don't buy into that, oh, they have such great potential thing. All right, so we've covered the who, what, and the when. The where, you know, I don't really know what the where might be in this case. Is like, where do you actually fire? This should be obvious. Don't do it in front of other people. You should do it behind closed doors. And if you work in a virtual environment, it should be a private meeting. I would highly recommend that it would be involving your human resource manager or representative and the supervisor and the person in question, the person whose employment is being terminated. Those three individuals should be there, and some kind of documentation might be presented to the person as well. So who, what, when, where, why. We've covered the why, I suppose, also with the when, which is the why is because they are failing to meet expectations, and you've met all your obligations and they're still failing to meet expectations. Or the why is because they have committed some egregious, totally unacceptable act and behavior that they need to go. The how is, again, has to do with, you would do it with the HR rep. And if you don't have somebody in HR, you can certainly reach out to my team and we can provide that service for you just as a temporary thing with that individual situation. We can actually do it with you there. Or at minimum, have somebody else, another stakeholder in the business present, because you don't want a situation later where he said, she said comes up and there's a dispute as to what was said in the meeting or how it went down. I would recommend there be somebody else in the meeting as a witness. And the other part of the how is that you would provide some kind of documentation so that there's some clarification there. Is this due to cause, or is this due to a lack of performance? And it's dated and that kind of thing. And you would spell out, you know, it's effective immediately, and any other kind of details could be handled both verbally but also documented. The other part of the question of how relates to how you should be perform in this situation. Certainly don't have any anger involved. And I heard Jack Welch say that you want to help them land on their feet. So if you can provide some sort of mechanism to take away a bit of the pain. I mean, the ultimate consequence is the termination of employment. But if it's through lack of performance, it's maybe just a bad fit. And if you can provide a recommendation to them where you highlight those strengths that they have that just maybe didn't manifest in great performance for this position and this role, then you can do that. You can provide recommendation letters and that kind of stuff. So it seems, I think, to a lot of people that, well, if you're letting someone go, you would never recommend them to someone else, but it may be a poor fit. Like maybe you made a poor hiring decision. You hired the wrong person for the job. They are incapable of doing it, but that doesn't mean they're incapable of performing well at any job. And that's something that should really be stated here, because I started the video by saying this is an unpleasant topic, and it's certainly an unpleasant experience to have to go through to let someone go, and even more experience to be let go, to be fired. But it can be the charitable thing to do, right? It can be very considerate to somebody to let them go immediately when you know that there isn't a bright future for that person. People want to develop, they want to enjoy, and they want to feel appreciated. If you have some kind of contempt for a person on your team and it's just frustrating to you for whatever reason what's happening, you are actually doing them a favor, letting them go out and find somewhere else that they'll be a better fit and they can be successful. And it would be really kind of cruel to keep them on their team where maybe they're getting some kind of passive-aggressive behavior from you or their immediate supervisor, and they can just pick up the tension every time they come to work that they're underappreciated or just not well liked, or whatever the case may be. When you've made a determination that somebody needs to go, bear that in mind. That helps you to go into this situation and check your emotions at the door by realizing, no, I'm going to try to help this person land on their feet. This is actually in their best interest. And many people would look back at a situation like that and say, you know what, that was good. It didn't feel good that day or at that time, but it probably did need to happen, and I'm better off for it, or whatever. And there are people that I've let go over the years that I later found out that they were very successful in a completely different industry or in a different company, that kind of thing. And I'm pleased about that. So that's the part of the how, is there's no anger and animosity. This is really just business. And it can be that in the situation of letting someone go for cause that they may have stolen or whatever, you could in your mind have a little bit of emotion. You could be really angry with the person. You could feel let down and betrayed as their employer. But what I like to do is try to be empathic in my mind. I'm not necessarily looking for a lot of excuses in those cases. I'll give a person an opportunity to explain themselves, even though it's not going to impact the decision, unless, of course, I had the details wrong. But I'd be empathic and think to myself, oh, maybe they've got some real issues at home. I think of an individual that I know that was let go from a position, who was stealing from the company. And it turned out this individual had some personal issues, some gambling problems. Sometimes you've seen where people have substance abuse issues. And I'm empathic, and in my heart, my heart sort of goes out to them and goes, wow, they've got bigger challenges and some real troubles they've got to get through in their personal life. And so you want to make sure that you're not carrying any sort of emotion and anger or that kind of thing into the situation. That's the other part of the how. We want people to succeed, and we hope that the person will go on and be successful. We genuinely hope that. We want the person to go on and be successful elsewhere. It's unfortunate it didn't work out. We take our own responsibility for any regard in any way that we failed that person, but we're making a decision that's in both parties' best interest. And then, wish the person well and shake their hand or whatever it is, show them a genuine sign of that you wish them well. And I would keep it short. The first person I ever fired in my management career, I don't remember how long, but it was really painful. The person, I just tried so often throughout the process, I was complimenting, making sure the person didn't take it personally, that he wondered the whole time what was going on. Was he being fired or not? And at the end, I was like, yes. And that story ends with me driving the person home because he had missed his ride and too much time had passed. It was a really awkward situation. So you want to try to cut to the chase. There isn't a big discussion. If you're entering into a meeting to let somebody go, share with them. I would be bold right out of the gates and say, this meeting, unfortunately, I've got to let you go. Here's the reason why, short and sweet. You may get some debate from the person on the other end, and you may have to say, I understand you don't agree with this decision. However, the decision has been made. If you shouldn't be entering into a termination meeting with that in mind if you're still in an investigation mode. And so if you're investigating a situation, and you want to hear their side of the story or whatever, then keep an open mind. You haven't made up your mind yet. I have been in situations where you're sort of giving them one last opportunity to explain away a situation, and they don't have a valid explanation, and so you proceed at that moment. But other than that, you're keeping the meeting short and sweet. Don't engage in a debate. Don't engage in a big discussion, and wish the person well. And then maybe human resources can assist them with the logistics, the parts of, do they need to turn in any company property? Are there some loose ends they need to tie up, some client files that need to be discussed? What's going on? Are they midway through a project? All those kinds of things that can happen with their peers or whatever, but could be supervised by HR to make sure that there's no sort of animosity brewing and damage that person can cause. So you've got to handle that on a case-by-case situation. So that's kind of the 5 W's and the how and how it relates to your obligations. In addition to that, I would just say that one of the ways that you can avoid this, aside from doing your obligations, I'm not saying that right. One of the things I've observed is that people avoid doing this when they know it's necessary because they're thinking of the pain that it's going to inflict on themselves. And I'm not talking about the actual meeting of letting someone go. I'm talking about following that. It's like, oh, this person is in the middle of, and they're doing lots of good work, and they've done other things, and maybe they're performing well or whatever, and they're thinking about, how am I going to replace this person? And so my advice to you, as being a very effective manager, you should always be recruiting. You want to have a pipeline of talent that's ready to step in immediately. And you should have manage your operation in such a way it's decentralized, that multiple people can perform tasks in the meantime. I would recommend that you take on the short-term pain for the long-term gain of getting the right fit and the right individual in a job. Do not delay or postpone because you realize, oh, it's going to be difficult to replace this person. Again, it may seem like something, if you haven't seen that, or if you're not being honest with yourself, you might think that that's a point that you can just sort of glaze over and it's not that important, but I'm telling you, it happens very frequently in business where people are putting off and procrastinating on making a difficult decision like terminating someone's employment because they don't want to face the pain of having to replace that person, and maybe they're going to have to take on extra responsibility themselves as the supervisor, extra work. Like, I don't know where I'm going to find any more time to do that or whatever. So listen to this video and don't put yourself in that situation. Make sure that you have other talent in place that can help you out while you're looking for a replacement. But more than that, you should have 1, 2, or 3 replacements for any position that you can reach out to. So you're always recruiting. That may sound impractical to you, and I won't spend time in this video demonstrating to you that it's very practical. And I've often had a situation where I've let somebody go and I've had a hiring decision or a valid and very viable replacement situation lined up within hours. That there's people that want to work for me, they want a position. I have a network of people, and I call up the, sort of some talent that's waiting in the wings, and you can replace immediately. So keeping those relationships alive and making sure that you are always looking for talent, that is going to help you so that you don't have to face this situation where you prolong the inevitable because you're afraid of the pain. So those are the main points I wanted to cover. I've undoubtedly left out some responses to questions you may have regarding this. I hope you don't have to face this very often, but I hope you will face this as an effective manager immediately when you do need to deal with it. And leave a comment and ask me more questions if there's something you want me to elaborate on. We have to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.